The new left emerged from the interlocking and overlapping of the social and cultural discontents of the 60s. None of these was simple. One might say that it thrived on the decade's climate of protest. Awareness of urban and rural poverty, about which Michael Harrington wrote in The Other America, and to which President Kennedy drew attention in the 1960 election, played a large role. But the civil rights leaders who took advantage of the moment to march against poverty and for jobs also converted many young people to their cause. And the New Left found its audience in the anti-war movement that grew with the escalation of a new war in Vietnam. The peace marchers who protested the war in Vietnam confronted Union members and state troopers who beat them up, demonstrating that peace was not to be achieved simply by asking for it. Demonstrators who gave flowers to military men armed with rifles and bayonets failed to convince very many to come over to their side. Those who burned their draft cards and destroyed American flags incited the military police to attack them. Slogans of "make love, not war" backfired, as both women and men were brutally beaten to break up the demonstrations. And even one of the favorite slogans of women towards the end of the 1960s, "Girls say yes to boys who say no," to persuade men not to go to Vietnam, turned against young women who ended up being subservient to the men they hoped to persuade. These 1960s protests relied not on an old left, which had relationships to the old socialist and communist Soviet Union, but to a new commitment to participatory democracy. They attacked wealth, affluence, and property, as well as corporate influence on democratic government in the interest of ensuring that everybody could participate in making decisions and sharing responsibility. In the view of the New Left, everyone should be allowed to speak their piece. All action would be undertaken by egalitarian community groups. Student leaders in Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, were convinced that everybody deserved an opportunity to participate in committees, to hold leadership positions, to speak for their communities, perhaps with the exception of women. And that required at least a reasonable education, a modicum of economic equality. To achieve this, SDS turned by the late 1964 and early 1965 period to economic research and action projects, community-based projects in which men and women organized poor people to demand justice. Once again, women's expectations did not match the reality. They noticed that women did not share in the official leadership and grumbled loudly about who made decisions. They fretted about the dearth of women in committee offices or among those who led squadrons of either men or women into communities. Their roles seemed always to be in the background, staffing booths, preparing meals, distributing information. At the December 1965 annual meeting of the Students for a Democratic Society, Heather Booth and a number of her associates drafted a document similar to that drafted by women in the civil rights movement, asking two questions. Their questions were, what's the role of women in this organization? And how does that role relate to democracy? We, after all, they said, are excluded from this participatory democratic operation. The second question, why is there a tendency to talk about women filling slots rather than creating or leading programs? When they were laughed off the platform, women, black and white, women who came from the civil rights and anti-war movements, split off from Students for a Democratic Society. The move harked back to the 19th century abolitionist movement, when male abolitionists refused to acknowledge women's right to speak about women's issues, and women began to organize in separatist groups. By 1966 and 67, women were creating something akin to what we later called consciousness-raising groups. Women joined these groups to explore their poor positions in the movement and to make sense of the resulting loss of self-esteem. They wondered why they couldn't fulfill their sense of what they were or could be within SDS. They were experiencing, they said, a lack of respect, not only within SDS, but more broadly outside it. Women, they came to believe, and women only, could support other women. Rejecting male overtures to make peace, women increasingly turned to separatist groups. Here, in the middle of the 1960s, was the start of a new gender consciousness that imagined autonomy and independence, sexual freedom, and free love.